people.
Yes.
So we'll maybe just give 1 more minute,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yep, that's all good with me. Yes.
Thank you for that.
Have you got this crazy humid weather up there? We've got
Yes, it has. Yes, so it was raining until yesterday in the afternoon, and then suddenly it became very humid. And I could see all the jasmine, our jasmine really, suddenly growing looking very big. But yeah, today it's the same thing. So
yeah, we can't even see the mount today. It's just a fog out there.
Okay, I guess we should be all good to get started. It's nice to see everyone turning up on time and all of them there. So if it's okay, Sue, I'll make a start.
Yep. I'm in your hands.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. A warm welcome to all of our participants. Hope you're all doing well and surviving through these unprecedented times. As some of you know, Sue had planned her workshops all around the country, and usually we would tag along with her. But because of the COVID lockdown, they were put on hold at that time. And then I checked with Sue if she would consider making herself available to address some of the burning questions our whānau had to ask. And she agreed instantly. So here we have her, Sue Kurtovich from Kurtovich Consulting. When we mention your name, Sue, there are so many things that come to mind. And I will just go to perhaps the next slide, because we run out of space. We run out of space to add all the acknowledgements and undertakings, whether it's your valuable experience as an ECC president and CEO, or more recently as the acting CEO of ECC. You've always been there, and you've provided your mentorship and valuable guidance to anyone who wanted help with all things ECC. And in spite of your busy engagement and ongoing seminars, thanks, Sue, for making yourself available for our whānau. I'm sure there will be various takeaways from today's session, and we are truly grateful for this wonderful opportunity. So all our participants, how are we going to do this? We've received your questions. Thank you so much. And we have broadly categorized them into 4 sections: pay parity, vaccination requirements, funding related, and digital signature requirements. What we will not cover today is the professional growth cycle for management, teacher standards, and appraisal system. This is something that we hope that we will cover at a later stage. So what I'll do is I will request Sue to go through each section. You will see a whole list of questions there. And while she's on the topic, if you do have a question to add that you would like to ask, then please feel free to post them on chat, and I will get Sue's help. I will request her to address that for us as well. So with that, Sue, over to you. Let's begin with the pay parity questions, please.
Okay, so on the issue of pay parity, this one feels like a wee while ago now, because we seem to have had so many things since pay parity, but of course it is bubbling away there in the background. So yes, everything to do with pay parity has been now published in the Funding Handbook. So this is my copy. Usually if I'm at the seminar, I hold this up. This is my copy of the Funding Handbook, and you will find the updated version of the Funding Handbook on the Ministry of Education website. So if you go onto education.govt.nz, and if you click into the 0 to 6 years, and then you'll come up with the screen with everything for early childhood, and then you'll see funding that's got its own section. And then once you get into funding, you will see the Funding Handbook. There is a section called the Funding Handbook Updates. And so there is where you will find the whole list, and what the ministry did was, and I can hold these up for you. This was sort of the Funding Handbook updates for the latest updates, which were the ones on the 15th of September. So that was the date that we finally found out what the rules and the rates were in regard to pay parity, and all of that was included in an update in the Funding Handbook at that time. So there was a number of chapters that got updated. The main section where you'll find all of the new information around pay parity is in chapter 3. So it's 3B2, 3 capital B2 is where most of that information is 3B1 and mostly 3B2. But there are other sections that have been updated around this as well. So things like the completion of your RS3 form if you're a new service, your record keeping requirements, those are all in chapter 11. So the record keeping part of the handbook has been updated as well to include those things that you now need to keep as part of the pay parity if you decide to attest to pay parity. So everything you need to know is in in the new updates, the funding handbook, but it's one of those things where you need to go through and update each of those chapters, because the ministry doesn't sort of say we've updated just these lines or these pages. They just say there's a new chapter 3, there's a new chapter 11. So if you haven't done so already, get yourself onto the ministry's website, download the new chapters, the ones that have been amended, and make sure you're working from those. And that applies regardless of what the updates are, whether it's pay parity or anything else. You should always be working from the most current. Now, I print mine off because, I travel the country normally, and I like to take the whole handbook with me. But there's no need for you to print the handbook off. If you can work, you can operate from having that from your screen, but just make sure you're always working from the latest update. So everything to do with pay parity was updated in September, and you will be working from chapters that say September 2021. Okay, so that's that first one. When it comes to the pay parity steps, I'm assuming that question is in relation to the salary steps.
Yes, I believe so. So yes.
Yes, it is. Okay. So the pay parity salary steps are set out in chapter 3, and there are five steps now. When pay parity was first mooted by the minister at the at budget, so back in May of this year, it seems like an awful long time ago, but when he first mooted pay parity and announced the extra money and with great fanfare, the intention was that the steps would be the first 6 steps of the KTCA. So the KTCA is the Kindergarten Teachers Collective Agreement, okay? And so he was linking the attestation to pay parity to the first 6 steps. By the time this went through however many pairs of hands it did down in Wellington, and it actually popped out on the 15th of September, so that's when we finally found out what the detail was, then he had dropped the 6th step off off for pay parity. So now it is the first 5 steps of the kindergarten collective. So originally it was going to be 6. So that's where there's a little bit of confusion sometimes. Originally there was going to be 6, but it's now the 5 steps, okay? And those 5 steps are detailed in the funding handbook. And the 6th step, which the minister originally wanted to include, he has deferred. So he has deferred the 6th step. So steps 1 to 5 apply from 1 January 2022. And step 6, which he originally wanted to include, but he's dropped, he has committed to including that from 1 January 2023. Okay, so if you attest and opt in to pay parity, you know that you're currently working on that 5-step scale, but you're going to be working on the 6-step scale come another year gone. So 1 January 2023, 3. So it's really important if you're sitting on the fence, and I did a little bit of a survey about this as part of my early childhood counsel work. And when we had a look at where people were sitting on this, and this kind of leads me into the 4th question, and don't worry, I will come back onto the other question, but it felt like I think we've got services in about 4 categories. So are there some people who look at the extra income you're going to get from pay parity, you look at the salary scales from 1 to 5, you look at your current staff and the wages you're currently paying them, and you look at it and you go, it's actually a no-brainer. This extra money absolutely is there for us. It is going to work. We can make it work. And so, yep, we're opting in. So there's a small group of people that fit into that category, as far as I can tell. Okay, so these are people who are already paying either at those rates or close to it or well above it. And the extra money from the funding, from the difference between what they would get under the base funding rates and the extra money they're going to get under the pay parity rates, the extra money is enough to cover any shortfall and going forward as well. So there's no real worry. Or they're in a position to put fees up to cover any shortfall. So there's that group of people. Then there's a bunch of people who, from what I can establish, have attested yes when they completed their RS7 at the beginning of October, but they haven't done the sums yet. So they've got to go away and work it out. So that's another little group of people. So yes, they said yes, they want to give this extra money to their teachers, which is absolutely noble intent. No, nothing wrong with that. I haven't met anybody that doesn't want to pay their teachers more, but they've said yes, and then they're going to go away and work out how they're going to make that work. So that's another small category. Then there's another bunch of people, another category, where they've just looked at it and they've said, well, there's just absolutely no way in hang we can make this work. There's the gap between the extra funding between the base rate and the pay parity rate, that amount of extra money we're going to get, and the shortfall we've got between the teachers' current wages and what we would need to pay them on the full salary scale is just so enormous. There's just no way. We haven't got the ability to put up fees by that much, if at all. A whole bunch of other reasons. So they've just said, no, it's not for us. And they've been, they've made that decision. And then I think the biggest group of people we've got, probably over half, and this is my feeling from what, just the polls we've done and various other things that asking around, the biggest group of people are the ones who have said, we haven't attested on the 1st of October, but we're not ruling it out. We're going to go away and do more work on this and work out if we can make this work, because we really want to pay our teachers more. We want to remain competitive in the labour market, especially given how tight it is. And we're going to do our sums and we're going to sit down and really work out how we can make this work. But we haven't committed to a testing, so they haven't got the advance funding at the pay parity funding rates. They haven't got that advance for January and February at those rates. What they've said is, we'll get it in the wash up when we put in our 1 March funding claim, if it turns out that we can do our sums without the pressure that people were feeling back in September. We need to do a bit more work on this before we can commit. And they are doing that work now. And if they can make it work, they will when they do their attestation on the when they put their RS7 in at the beginning of February, they'll attest, yes, I did pay my staff at that salary scale from 1 January 2022. So it's sort of a retrospective thing. They won't lose out, because instead of getting the advance funding at the higher rate, they'll get all their wash up. So it's just buying a bit of time, I suppose. And I don't know, for those of you that are sitting out there listening to me today, I don't know which one of those categories you fit within. But my strong advice to people was to say, don't feel bullied into this if you're not sure if you can make it work. If it's a no-brainer, get on with it. Just get the money, and why not? But if you're feeling like this is something that could be a struggle, especially given the fact that we've got the first 5 steps now, we know that the 6th step is being added on the 1st of January 2023. And for those of you who've got long-serving staff, that may well have an impact. And also the KTCA, the collective that these wages are, or the scale is linked to, is being renegotiated, and new rates will come out in July 2021. Now, the minister has made an indication that he will fund it, but he hasn't said to the tune of how much. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Is everyone okay with that? And nothing further that came out on that? Okay.
So, so there is a couple of, now there's one from Tracy. She says the extra money started coming in from July 2020. It's not just the difference between new base rates and pay parity rate.
So sorry, I just didn't quite catch all of that, Pinky.
So I'm just going to repeat that. So it says the extra money started coming in from July 2020. It's not just the difference between new base rates and pay parity rate. Tracy, if you can unmute yourself and maybe just help understand Sue a little bit more on this.
Okay, sure. Sue was saying about the funding is between the base rate and the new pay parity rate. I just wanted to highlight that the budget provided for pay parity actually started in July 2020 when they raised the rates from $11.82 per hour for the 20-hour funding. So it's just a point of, it's just a point to highlight to people that the funding for pay parity started already in July 2020. That has to be factored in. And it's not just the new, base rate.
I guess. I understand. I understand that point, Tracy, and thank you. When it comes to where you're at the moment, which is to look at your whether or not this is affordable to you, then you're going to need to look at your budget for, and this is the way I've sort of been getting people to look at it, especially if you're trying to think about how do I how do I establish if this is something that's affordable. Just do your budget for next year, for 2022, based on you staying on the base funding rates. So just do your budget and say, how's it looking? So based on what you pay your staff currently, and based on what income you expect to get, and it's not a difficult exercise to do. So you take the base funding rates, and you take your expected funded child hours for the year, which are should be reasonably easy for you to establish, because you've got fancy student management systems now that calculate all of those things. So in any given year approximately how many under 2 hours, 2 and over, your 20 hours funding and your plus 10, you kind of got a bit of a general idea how many hours you would expect for each of those categories over a 12-month period, and then multiply those out by your base rate, and then look at your expenses and go, okay, what's our current salaries, because that's your big one, what's our property costs, and then what's all those other incidental expenses that you have, and have a look at your budget for next year. I mean, you should have that anyway. You should be looking at next year's budget. So you've done that.
We've done that. Our treasurer has looked at it, and it looks fine. My concern was that a lot of people had the idea that the funding for pay parity is just the difference between the 1352 versus 1319. And I've made it a point that I used the actual hours times the actual rates for last year versus this year. And the funding increase is quite substantial. It wasn't the amount that ECC gave us in the spreadsheet, that was, I think, if we calculate based on your actual hours versus actual rates, difference between last year and this year is substantially more than the initial ECC spreadsheet that went out, because I think that one kind of underestimated the amounts that people are actually getting just between last year to this year.
Yeah, but in the end, any change that you're going to need to make to your staff salaries from where they are currently to what you would need to pay them on the 1st of January 2022, according to the 5-step scale, any change in that is going to need to be funded by any extra income that you get for next year. And that's so any extra income that you've had since the 1st of July, when the rates change, and I do agree they did change then, that is already absorbed into your budget and into your pay rates.
Yeah.
And so this is the step up. This is that shift from where you currently are. So wages on the basis of the pay, the funding increases in July, there's every chance that staff got a salary increase at that time, because that's often what happens. If there's a funding increase, there's a salary increase. But what we're now looking at is that next step, if there is one. Now, there may well be there isn't in your service. This is why it's and the minister's absolutely right on this. Pay parity works for some, but not for everyone. And he's been the first to admit that. The scale itself is a fixed scale. Where your staff are now versus where they need to be on that scale is going to determine whether this is affordable to you or not. So you do need to establish how much extra from where you currently are, so where your wages were going to be at the 31st of December 2021, to the next morning when you wake up on the 1st of January 2022, what's the difference in your annual salary bill? And how are you going to fund that? And that's the question that actually everybody has to answer. And if the answer is, actually, we can fund that very easily, because with the July increase we got last year, or this year, plus the increase we're getting in on the 1st of January if we opt in, if those two things combined will cover that, absolutely fine. But for a bunch of services, the answer is it doesn't go anywhere near it. I get the feeling going around that probably in some of the smaller regions, it's harder because the wages are a little lower already, and that's generally what we find. In Auckland, generally wages are a bit higher across any sector, including teaching, early childhood teaching, and in the areas of Auckland where parents have a greater ability to pay fees, then often wages are higher as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that are going to determine whether or not this is going to be something for you. But every service needs to sit down and work out how they can afford to pay the first 5 steps, anticipate how they're going to pay the 6th step in January next year, and also factor in some ability to cover the renegotiation of the KTCA. So I'm certainly not saying don't opt in. What I'm saying is you must do your sums.
Yeah, and if it's any help, I've got a spreadsheet that has the rates and for you to fill in the hours, and people can work those out themselves. So I'm happy to share that with anyone if they're keen.
Great. That's great. That's great. Yeah. So, I maintain the simplest, even just a quick back of the envelope kind of thing, because there's some very complicated stuff out there, and I've seen all the different versions of these things. But what I've sort of suggested as I've gone around is at least do the back of the envelope sort of stuff. That quick and dirty calculation, which is how much extra and how much is it going to cost us, and at least do that. Then you know whether you're within the ballpark, and then you can start to do a little bit more work. As I've sort of said, everybody wants to provide extra increased staff wages. I haven't met a centre manager, owner, or a committee that said, no, we don't want to pay our staff more. I haven't met anybody that says that. Everybody wants to, but in the end, there has to be that sort of fiscal responsibility. And what I am saying to people is that please do not fund pay parity shortfalls, if you've got one, using your reserves. That to me is an absolute no-no. If you have, you should not be budgeting an operating loss. It's not fiscally responsible, and it's not sustainable long term to do that. Reserves are for a rainy day. Reserves are for when we have lockdowns that we weren't anticipating. Reserves are for when the roof needs replacing, or the drains all need digging up, or those kinds of things. But if you budget losses over time, then your service will not be there for the families, and no one will have a job. So I guess that's kind of my bottom line about that.
That's good. Yes, so that's good. Is there anything else you want to add on to this topic, Sue, before we move to the vaccination? Yep.
Well, I guess that there is the question about Evolve opting in. I can't answer that one. I don't know. I suspect that some of the bigger operators may be in a position where they can kind of massage out these things a little more. When you're looking at a single standalone service, you've sort of got less ability to spread it. So I honestly don't know, but I think there's a lot of fence sitting going on at the moment, and a lot of hard number crunching happening in the next couple of months, with a hope that more will be able to opt in on the 1st of February, because they will be able to and will be able to backdate it. So I think that's kind of the hope, that there'll be a lot more people who will be able to in the next little while. But that depends a lot too on things like the lockdown, the sustained lockdown in Auckland, which is perhaps restricting the ability to increase fees if that's what you need to do. So I'm aware that some services are struggling at the moment with the bubbles situation. If you can have lots of bubbles, you might be viable at the moment, but if you're really restricted with your bubbles, then potentially it's a bit tougher. And so that may factor into people's thinking around pay parity as well. Okay.
So this question, we are opening a new center soon. How will pay parity affect us? Just a quick,
Yeah, well, no differently than anyone else, to be perfectly honest. You'll still, when you fill in your RS3, I think it is, which is your first funding, where you anticipate what your funding's going to be, you're going to be thinking about whether or not you are meeting that full salary scale on from 1 January 2022, or when you first when you actually, whatever your opening day is. So you're really making the same judgments that everybody else is. Is it affordable? And the answer is, we hope it will be, but if it's not, you're going to have a look and say, how can we make it affordable? And if you try all the options and you can't, then you're going to have to say, we can't do this.